Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start with a look at the day's headlines. On stage together, musicians from the south and north performing as one. Wrapping up their four-day stay in Pyongyang, South Korea's art troupe will belt out their hit songs one last time before returning home. A somber anniversary. South Korea marks the 70th anniversary of the Jeju April 3rd incident. We'll be crossing over to Jeju later to watch the ceremony and a speech by President Moon Jae-in. Plus, South Africa's anti-apartheid activist Winnie Mandela dies at the age of 81. She was the former wife of the country's first black president, Nelson Mandela. We start, though, with the ongoing inter-Korean diplomacy, and in another first in this period of warming ties, some athletes from both sides of the border held a joint taekwondo demonstration in Pyongyang on Monday. And tonight, South Korea's art troupe will share the stage with North Korean musicians one last time before they return home. Our Lee Ji-won starts us off.
South Korea's team of taekwondo demonstrators now in the north gave their second and final performance Monday afternoon at the Pyongyang Grand Theater. It started at 4 p.m. in front of a North Korean audience of around 1,200 people, including Choi Hui, the chairman of the North's National Sports Guidance Committee, and a number of high-level North Korean taekwondo and sport officials. First up was South Korea's World Taekwondo team with a flashy show about 30 minutes long, followed by some 100 martial artists from North Korea's International Taekwondo Federation for another half an hour. The highlight of Monday's show was the short but meaningful collaboration by the two sides, which lasted about 2 minutes. It was their first time to put on a show together in Pyongyang. Though the moves were simple and basic, the two teams displayed harmony and synchronization, just like they did at the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in February. And the North Korean crowd gave them some big cheers. Meanwhile, South Korean pop musicians in the north were preparing for their next concert scheduled for Tuesday. Then they'll be performing alongside North Korean musicians, and Monday they were reportedly discussing how to arrange the lineup. The 190-member South Korean delegation, including the martial artists, will return to Seoul together after Tuesday's concert. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, some other things the two Koreas have shared is the idea of their athletes marching in together for the Asian Games in Indonesia in August. That's the outcome of Monday's meeting between the sports ministers of both sides. They agreed to discuss specific ways to deepen and boost sports interactions after the 2018 Seoul-Pyongyang summit that's slated for April 27th is all wrapped up. Kim Il-guk, the North Korean sports minister, said together they will be the best team in Asia if the two sides join forces, and showed willingness to meet for talks and exchange documents often. His South Korean counterpart, Do Jong-hwan, expressed hope that sports could pave the way for inter-Korean reconciliation. And with US President Donald Trump set for a summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in May, the US leader has decided to invite Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for talks. The White House says the summit, the third between the leaders, will take place from April 17th to the 18th at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. The two leaders are expected to discuss issues concerning North Korea amid concerns in Tokyo that Japan is being sidelined in the fast-developing diplomacy with Pyongyang. The White House added that President Trump and Prime Minister Abe will also discuss the bilateral trade relationship between the two nations. Now, calling it a job well done, President Moon Jae-in showed appreciation on Monday for his trade officials' accomplishments with regards to the recently concluded FTA negotiations between Seoul and Washington. Our chief Cheonghwa-dae correspondent Moon Gon-young reports.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in is relieved that any potential conflict between Seoul and Washington have been settled by concluding negotiations on the 6-year-old Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Speaking at a weekly meeting of his top aides on Monday, the South Korean leader gave credit to his trade officials who spent weeks hotel hopping in Washington as they raced to overcome major trade hurdles with their U.S. ally ahead of high-stakes nuclear discussions with North Korea.
보호무역주의 흐름이 고조되는 상황에서 미국과의 FTA 개정 협상을 빠르게 마무리함으로써 대외 경제의 불확실성을 해소한 것은 매우 큰 성과입니다.
The trade officials' efforts culminated in a revised pact the two countries announced last week that gives U.S. automakers and pharmaceuticals more access to the South Korean market while lifting the threat of a 25% U.S. tariff on South Korean steel in exchange for quotas that will cut imports of Korean steel by about 30%. The president, however, still asked his government to carefully review possible impacts of the revised free trade deal and draw up necessary measures to make sure local industries aren't negatively affected.
한반도 평화 정착 및 북핵 문제 해결을 위해 한미 양국 간 긴밀한 협력이 꼭 필요한 상황에서 갈등 요인을 정리했다는 점에서도 아주 잘한 일입니다.
By securing a new approach to bilateral trade, the presidential Blue House believes South Korea and the U.S. can now focus on the road ahead, keep all their attention on the high politics of peace and security, with the South Korean president set to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the end of this month, and the first ever North Korea-U.S. summit expected to take place by the end of May. Moon Gon-young, Arirang News, the Blue House.
Now, a full-blown trade war between the United States and China is looking more and more likely as the U.S. gears up to unveil its final list of Chinese goods that will be subject to increased tariffs. And Beijing is retaliating by levying tariffs on almost 130 U.S. goods, mostly food imports. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The U.S. is set to announce a final list of Chinese goods that will be subject to additional tariffs by Friday, a move expected to intensify trade tensions between the world's two economic superpowers. This comes as President Trump signed the China tariff proclamation last month as part of punishment against Beijing over its intellectual property rights violations. The list, covering $60 billion worth of annual imports, is expected to target over 100 products, including home appliances. China, for its part, has threatened to retaliate with its own trade sanctions. Beijing's finance ministry said in a statement Sunday that it's increasing the tariff rates on 128 kinds of U.S. products, including pork and fruits, and the new rates came into effect on Monday. It's imposing 25% tariffs on 8 kinds of U.S. imports, including pork, and a 15% tariff on 120 other goods, including fruits. The tariffs mirror Washington's 25% charge on imported steel and 15% hike on aluminum announced in March. Such tariffs are seen to target America's so-called Farm Belt voters who helped to elect Trump, as U.S. farmers who export wine, fruit, and pork will be hurt the most by Beijing's move. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
After months of China's economic retaliation against South Korea to express its disapproval over Seoul's THAAD missile defense upgrade from the United States, things are finally looking up. Stock prices in companies with close links to China have been rising as its ban on Korean goods and services is showing signs of easing a touch at least. Our Kim Mok-yeon reports.
Last week, Chinese State Councilor Yang Jie-chi visited South Korea to brief President Moon Jae-in on a summit meeting held between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Chinese President Xi Jinping. During his talks with President Moon, Yang reaffirmed the Chinese government's willingness to strengthen cooperation with South Korea on easing tensions on the peninsula, as well as look forward reinforcing and restoring economic ties between Seoul and Beijing. The visit by the special Chinese envoy was not only a boost in Northeast Asia's diplomacy, but also a promising picture for investors, as shown on many China-related shares that took an upturn on Monday. Shares of flight services including Asiana Airlines and Jeju Air rose 3% and 1.5% respectively since Friday, while those in the accommodation sector such as Hotel Shilla saw their shares climb 6%, surpassing the $95 mark for the first time in more than 2 years. Shares of duty-free shops rose dramatically too, with Hanwha Galleria Time World soaring nearly 18% and Shinsegae International also climbing nearly 9%. Some of the most sought-after South Korean cosmetic brands by Chinese customers, Amore Pacific and LG Household and Healthcare, also saw their shares rise 5% and nearly 4% respectively. Firms in the Hallyu content industry, which were hit hard by bans and unilateral cancellations, also showed signs of recovery. Korea's major entertainment agencies YG and JYP Entertainment rose along the 4% margin, while smaller companies such as Chorodokbae Media and CJ E&M both rose more than 2%. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
China's recent decision to ban solid waste imports is having a huge impact both here in Korea and around the world as countries are scrambling for solutions for their growing mountains of trash. Lee Seung-jae reports.
According to data from the country's Environment Ministry, South Korea sold more than 196,000 tons of recycled waste in the international market last year, with around 128,000 tons, or some 2/3, heading to China. However, the ban on imports of 24 types of recyclables by China, a reflection of the nation's tougher stance on pollution, forced residents to halt recycling after a number of garbage collection companies in Korea halted collections, citing low margins and higher processing costs. The problem is on an even bigger scale globally, as China's policy shift, which took effect on January 1st, has left exporters in the US, Canada, and other European countries scrambling for ways to deal with their growing mountains of trash. In the UK, despite the Chinese plastic ban taking effect at the start of the year, many recycling businesses stopped shipping plastic to China last fall over fears it might not arrive before the deadline, causing mounting waste problems in Britain even before the start of the ban. A U.S. representative at the World Trade Organization's Council for Trade in Goods has expressed concern that China's foreign waste ban will cause a fundamental disruption in global supply chains for scrap material, and requested that China immediately halt implementations and revise the measures. China, however, defended its policy, with Beijing's foreign ministry saying the concerns are neither reasonable nor have any legal basis. It added that restricting and banning the imports of solid waste is an important measure China has taken to implement the new development concept, improve environmental quality, and safeguard people's health. While many parts of the world seek a solution, the U.S. request will likely fall on deaf ears amid Washington's intensifying trade spat with China. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Consumer prices here in Korea saw increases in the 1% range for the 6th straight month in March. Statistics Korea says its consumer price index jumped 1.3% compared to the same month last year. Prices of agricultural and fisheries products in particular spiked by a whopping 4.7% on year. An official from the statistics agency says the price increase of vegetables has slowed, though, compared to the previous month as the weather got warmer in March. The core inflation rate, which excludes volatile food and oil prices, rose 1.3% on year. South Korea's private consumption per GDP fell to a record low last year, according to a report by the Bank of Korea on Tuesday. Last year's private spending was 48.1% of GDP, a 0.6 percentage point drop from a year earlier. South Korea's private spending figures have fallen faster than any other country and are at their lowest level since 1970, when the BOK began to gather relevant data. The percentage of private consumption per GDP, which has reached 70% in the early 1970s, dropped to around 50% in the 2000s. Economic experts say that recent falls have to do with Korea's sluggish job market and aging population. Now, President Moon Jae-in is due to attend a commemorative ceremony this morning for the 70th anniversary of the Jeju April 3rd incident. And during this dark period in Korea's history, about 10% of Jeju's population, estimated at around 30,000 men, women and children, were killed due to a government-backed anti-communist suppression campaign from 1948 to 1954. This will be the first time a sitting president will attend such a ceremony since the day was designated as a national commemorative day back in 2014. It was one of President Moon's 100 key election promises to establish the truth about this dreadful massacre. Now, along with the Moon administration's efforts to commemorate and discover the truth about the April 3rd Jeju incident that began 70 years ago today, Cha Sang-mi delves deeper into what triggered the incident and why it is not considered an official part of Korea's modern history.
Jeju Island is famous for its beauty and natural wonders, but its dark history is often overlooked. In 1947, the shooting of civilians by police during the March 1st movement celebration triggered a period of turmoil on Jeju Island.
A child at the march was ran over by the police. As the crowd grew louder around the policeman who claimed he didn't know there was a kid, other officers started firing their guns at innocent people, killing 6. If the government back then and the U.S. military government had apologized, this might not have become such a big incident.
The April 3rd Jeju incident is a series of events that took place from 1947 to 1954, resulting in the highest number of casualties in modern Korean history, excluding the Korean War. Some 25,000 to 30,000 people were killed. It was a horrific massacre, but the truth behind the incident wasn't revealed until over half a century later.
The then government distorted the incident as a communist riot and banned the public from even discussing it. There was a time when authors would get arrested if they published novels or literary pieces featuring this theme.
Citizens' efforts to find the truth led to the special act on the restoration of honor of the victims in 2000.
One of the public-level efforts includes a petition to obtain an official apology for the incident from the United States. We can't just blame the then U.S. government, but it's true they were behind the strategy and planning.
Reconciliation movements have also been seen on Jeju Island recently, the families of the deceased and the police association making reconciliatory statements and paying tribute together.
The general Korean public lacked understanding of the Jeju incident, often thinking it is just the history of Jeju. So the people of Jeju felt very isolated. But the incident is not just Jeju's history. It is our country's tragedy that we need to help heal and restore.
The head of the National Museum says this is a horrendous event in Korean history, but many parts of the world nowadays are also experiencing similar tragedies, and that through understanding and empathizing with the pain of Jeju incident, people can strive together to try and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
And we'll be continuing our coverage of the April 3rd incident in Jeju Island when we cross over there for President Moon Jae-in's speech in around 20 minutes from now. In some other news, though, rival lawmakers have their plates full as a number of key issues need to be sorted out during the April parliamentary session. But from the start, they could not narrow their differences while trying to finalise the 30-day schedule. Our Kim Min-ji has the latest from the National Assembly.
Korea's parliament is in a race against time to reach a consensus on amending the country's constitution. Rival parties are in a tug-of-war, with conservative opposition parties calling for the president to withdraw his proposal and demanding that the ruling Democratic Party of Korea come up with its own draft that seeks to dilute the massive powers of the president. The ruling party, meanwhile, wants a deal struck by no later than May 4th, giving it just enough time to meet other legal procedures so that it can hold a referendum on the revision in tandem with local elections on June 13th. The National Assembly Speaker on Monday called on parties to put aside their bickering and make sure they are productive in April during his regular meeting with floor leaders.
Please do your role so that the National Assembly can be productive and support the people. The April session will likely be the last before my term ends in May. I call on floor leaders for efforts to pass many bills and also deal with the constitutional amendment. I will also do my best.
Monday's meeting also saw a new player on the political scene. The Liberal Party for Democracy and Peace and the Progressive Justice Party launched a joint negotiating body, giving them a combined 20 seats in parliament.
Until now, we haven't been able to come to the negotiating bloc due to a shortage in parliamentary seats. Our new bloc will be at the forefront of making efforts to hammer out deals. When it comes to the government structure, parties need to put aside their political interests and think of what the people want.
The new negotiating bloc is expected to give the ruling party a degree of backing due to its left-leaning tendencies. The new four-party setting is expected to end up creating a 2-against-2 composition. For now, it seems that the April session will be unpredictable given that neither side has an overwhelming lead in parliamentary seats. In fact, the start of the April extraordinary session also got off to a rough ride. With rival parties at odds over contentious bills that have to be handled, they failed to agree on the itinerary for the 30-day session, and a full parliamentary meeting that was scheduled for Monday afternoon was also called off. Getting off to a bad start, an intense session will likely be in store, especially with a huge stack of items to work through, including deliberation of the government's extra budget bill, interpellation sessions, and amending the constitution. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now let's take a look at some sports news now. It took 8 playoffs holes over 2 days, but South Korea's star golfer Park In-bi fell just short of winning her 8th LPGA major title at the ANA Inspiration in California on Monday, with the South Korean tied with Sweden's Pernilla Lindberg after 4 sudden death playoff holes on Sunday. Play was suspended due to a lack of light, but the two came back the following morning, and after 4 more holes of tight action, the Swede finally managed to capture her first major title. Park, already an LPGA Hall of Famer, was going for a second victory this season after missing the latter part of the 2017 season with a back injury. And tennis sensation Jung Hyun has become the first Korean player to crack the top 20 of the ATP World Rankings. The 21-year-old was up 4 spots to 19th in the latest singles rankings released on Monday. It makes him the top-ranked Asian player in the world. Jung is on a hot streak at the moment, reaching at least the quarterfinals in each of the past 6 ATP Tour events and making the semi-final of the Australian Open. Now for a look at stories making headlines around the world, and we're going to start in South Africa. The former wife of Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, has died at the age of 81. Her family said she died in hospital on Monday after battling a long illness. For more on this and other international news, let's turn to our Arirang. So Arirang, if you wouldn't mind, give us a rundown of her controversial life.
Certainly, Mark. Winnie Mandela was just 23 when she married Nelson Mandela. Within years, he was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the struggle against racial apartheid. She had also been jailed a number of times and was hailed as the mother of New South Africa. The couple divorced in 1996, 2 years after Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president. Their divorce is said to have been sparked by their contrasting views on how to fight against white minority rule. Winnie has often been described as more cutthroat and unforgiving, whereas Nelson was an advocate of reconciliation. In her later years, Winnie Mandela's reputation took a turn for the worst as she was found guilty of being involved in the abduction and murder of a young activist. A year before their divorce, her husband also sacked her from his cabinet over allegations of corruption. In 2003, she was again embroiled in controversy after being convicted of fraud. Despite the scandals, she still has a strong following, and crowds of mourners gathered outside her home in Soweto in Johannesburg. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was among those paying their respects.
The death of Winnie Mandela is a great loss in that she has been one of the strongest women in our struggle, who suffered immensely under the apartheid regime, but notwithstanding all this, she remained strong, She remained determined, she was courageous, and in many ways she was also very stubborn. Stubborn on behalf of our people, because she knew that out of her stubborn disposition, she would be able to inspire millions of South Africans.
Turning to other news now, US President Donald Trump has come to the defense of America's largest broadcaster, Sinclair Broadcasting Group, which is facing backlash for promoting the president's anti-media rhetoric. Sinclair drew national attention over the weekend over a video clip which showed a compilation of news anchors from its roughly 200 local TV stations reading an identical speech criticising some outlets of bias and fake news. As the clip went viral, Trump took to Twitter on Monday to defend Sinclair and to take jabs at CNN and NBC News. He tweeted that it was so funny to watch, quote, fake news networks criticise Sinclair for being biased, adding Sinclair is, quote, far superior to CNN and even more fake NBC, which is a total joke. Sinclair Vice President Scott Livingston is reported to have sent an internal memo on Monday defending what he called well-researched journalistic initiative focused on fair and objective reporting. Also in the memo obtained by CNN Money, Livingston slammed what he called misleading, often defamatory stories about the company. A powerful 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck southern Bolivia on Monday and could be felt across several cities across neighbouring Brazil. The US Geological Survey said the quake struck at 10:40 a.m. local time. The epicentre was 127 kilometres southeast of Tarija and struck 557 kilometres below the surface. It was said to be one of the most powerful quakes on record in Bolivia, but didn't cause any damage or injuries because it was so deep.
Good morning. Seoul will continue to have very warm temperatures, while those in Beijing will notice a big drop in temperatures from high 20s to low teens due to rain. And that rain starts tomorrow here in South Korea as well, and it's forecast to be quite heavy, as Seoul could see up to 50 millimeters on Wednesday into Thursday, and that will also bring much chillier conditions to the nation. But for today, we'll continue to have unseasonably warm temperatures under mostly to cloudy skies. Seoul and Busan will top out at 20 degrees Celsius, while Daegu and Gyeongju will make it to 25 degrees this afternoon. But air quality will be normal all day, so enjoy the warmth. With that, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. So most parts of South Korea will continue to have unseasonably warm temperatures with good air today. Many regions in North Korea will see showers on this Tuesday. And as for the rest of Asia, despite the rainfall, Beijing will continue to have very unhealthy air quality. Meanwhile, Perth will continue to have very warm highs, while Sydney will notice a drop in temperatures. Heading to North America, major cities in North America will have a rainy Tuesday. And as for South America, it did not rain in Buenos Aires like we expected on Monday, but rain is in the forecast by the end of the week. And taking you to Europe, drivers across Scotland are advised to travel with caution as the latest weather warnings are announced. Lastly, to Africa, Algiers and Addis Ababa will have a rainy day. And that's all the weather update for now.
Well, thank you as always to our Lee Ji-hyun for the weather update. Normally this is where we'd be wrapping up, but today we'll be staying with you for an extra 20 minutes or so to bring you coverage of a solemn anniversary here in Korea. President Moon Jae-in is on the southern island of Jeju as we speak to attend a ceremony this morning for the 70th anniversary of the Jeju April 3rd incident. We'll be crossing over there live shortly. In the meantime, let's give you some background again before we speak to an expert on the matter. So it's known as the Jeju April 3rd incident, and during it, about 10% of Jeju's population, around 30,000 people, were killed due to a government-backed anti-communist suppression campaign that stretched over a number of years. Now, President Moon's attendance today will be the first time a sitting South Korean leader will attend such a ceremony since the day was designated as a national commemorative day in 2014. This was one of President Moon's 100 key election promises to establish truth about this awful time in Korea's history. So let's take another look at our report by our Cha Sang-mi about the April 3rd Jeju incident, and we'll delve a little bit deeper into what triggered the horrors of that time, and also look at why it really isn't, to this day, considered an official part of Korea's modern history.
Jeju Island is famous for its beauty and natural wonders, but its dark history is often overlooked. In 1947, the shooting of civilians by police during the March 1st movement celebration triggered a period of turmoil on Jeju Island.
A child at the march was ran over by the police. As the crowd grew louder around the policeman who claimed he didn't know there was a kid, other officers started firing their guns at innocent people, killing 6. If the government back then and the U.S. military government had apologized, this might not have become such a big incident.
The April 3rd Jeju incident is a series of events that took place from 1947 to 1954. Resulting in the highest number of casualties in modern Korean history, excluding the Korean War. Some 25,000 to 30,000 people were killed. It was a horrific massacre, but the truth behind the incident wasn't revealed until over half a century later.
The then government distorted the incident as a communist riot and banned the public from even discussing it. There was a time when authors would get arrested if they published novels or literary pieces featuring this theme.
Citizens' efforts to find the truth led to the Special Act on the Restoration of Honor of the Victims in 2000.
One of the public-level efforts includes a petition to obtain an official apology for the incident from the United States. We can't just blame the then U.S. government, but it's true they were behind the strategy and planning.
Reconciliation movements have also been seen on Jeju Island recently, the families of the deceased and the police association making reconciliatory statements and paying tribute together.
The general Korean public lacked understanding of the Jeju incident, often thinking it is just the history of Jeju. So the people of Jeju felt very isolated. But the incident is not just Jeju's history. It is our country's tragedy that we need to help heal and restore.
The head of the National Museum says this is a horrendous event in Korean history, but many parts of the world nowadays are also experiencing similar tragedies, and that through understanding and empathizing with the pain of Jeju incident, people can strive together to try and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
We are almost ready to cross over to Jeju Island for the ceremony and President Moon Jae-in's speech. In the meantime, let's get some more in-depth analysis on the Jeju April 3rd incident from an expert. We'll be keeping a close eye on the goings-on in Jeju as we await the president coming onto the stage to give us a speech. So joining us today is Professor An-jun Song, visiting professor from JD Michigan State University, currently at Yonsei University here in Seoul. Thank you ever so much for coming in.
Thank you.
We've been watching a couple of reports about this incident, the April 3rd Jeju incident, but for many Koreans it's an unfamiliar part of the country's history. Can you give us a little bit more detail about what went on there?
Yeah, the Jeju April 3rd incident referred to April 3rd of year 1948. But before we talk about 1948, we have to know what happened in the year 1947. In March 1st, 1947, there's about over 40,000 Jeju Islanders got together to celebrate the March 1st movement, right? The 3.1절. And there was several police fire against civilians, and 6 people died, and including one 6-year-old boy. And that triggers the kind of the anti-American sentiment in the minds of Jeju Islanders. And about that time, in United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 112 to conduct general election, the first general election in Korean Peninsula. But however, due to the Russian objection, the election only conducted in South. But afraid of that division by the United Nations, and there was several hundred of South Korean Labor Party, which was connected to the North Korean Communist Party, obviously, and they raided April 3rd, 2 a.m. They raided about 12 police stations out of 24, half of the police station in Jeju, and at the same time, and they started, that incident happens.
Yeah, so that's the background to what sparked the massacre and the reaction from the authorities by South Korea and the US as well. We are keeping an eye on what's happening in Jeju. It doesn't look like they're ready to start yet, though. But for someone just hearing about the history, I suspect it's really hard for them, especially our international viewers, to get their minds around exactly what happened. Do you think this April 3rd incident really shaped the attitudes of Jeju Islanders even to this day?
Yeah, I think that's will have a significant impact on the Jeju Islanders, the mindset, also including the mainlanders also, because we haven't really talked about it publicly. Because first time I heard about the Jeju, the April 3rd incident was I saw the famous TV soap opera, which was in 1991. And they briefly talk about the incident. And so I was in college, I was like, oh, there's something I didn't learn from my high school, even school, they never talk about it, history book. I was like, something new, I was surprised to see it. And I had some friend actually from Jeju Island, and they didn't really talk about much, but somehow they talk about something happened, about the distrust against, mainlanders and how they feel about it. And then, there's some social issues behind it.
And the government has made efforts to compensate the survivors and the bereaved families as well. Can you just tell us what they received, and do you think it was sufficient compensation?
Yeah, it was 1997 when the former President Kim Dae-jung was elected, and the Jeju people, people in Jeju was very happy about it because he was the first president who promised to conduct official investigation on the matter, and that's what he did. And he passed the special act regarding the Jeju April 3rd incident. And what happened was that the special act does have the provision related to the compensation, but there's some problem there because the way it defined the victim in the special act, which include the dead people who were dead, missing, or they forcibly imprisoned due to the incident. However, the compensation only allowed to the living victims, which is about 110 people.
Right.
Yeah, so very limited compensation.
Yeah, absolutely, because it happened so many decades ago. We're still watching video footage from Jeju. We'll be crossing over there later. It looks like a beautiful spring day there. What's your take on this commemoration, and what especially is the significance of President Moon going today, the first sitting South Korean leader to make the trip down there to commemorate this day, this anniversary?
Yeah, I think it's a very historic movement because that is the first president, actually, the sitting president, who actually attended the meeting, right? So I think that's the one kind of beginning of the new era, because you try to look at the dark side also, the history, not only bright side and dark side, looking into it, something we never talk about it, but that's what's there, right? The truth, right? So I think it's a good starting point to teach next generation, something we did wrong, and try to teach them, should not repeat the same mistake in the future.
Yes, and this is what President Moon is really pressing home, is about recognizing all of Korea's history, the good spots and also the dark spots, and establishing that in the constitutional revision his administration is trying to put forward. What do you think? Do you think this visit today is part of that effort?
I think so. I mean, there's the Moon Jae-in administration tried to add the changes, right, to preamble to the Korean Constitution to include several provisions. I mean, several new sentences, which including the Jeju April 3rd incident. I think that's a great move to, I think that's the one. We have to teach history about some. We can't talk about just everything right? We have to talk about something wrong or mistakes, so we can, do not repeat the same mistake. I think that's a really good point. I mean, to begin with.
Absolutely, and that is very much the case. I want to just quickly stick with President Moon because he was Chief of Staff to Roh Moo-hyun, who was the first president to officially apologize for the actions of the authorities on Jeju Island. He did so in 2003. Do you think another reason for President Moon going today is his ongoing affection for his former boss?
Yeah, I guess there's some part of it, but I think the main reason he's going to Jeju today is not only about his affection to his former boss. It's about I think he's also the civil rights activist, right? Lawyer. He's helping people in need, right? So he understands the pain about the people who did not get attention, right? So I guess he's the right. I mean, he's the one who really understands the sorrow.
Yeah. Okay, the ceremony is ongoing. We were looking at the names of some of the victims of the April 3rd incident there. So, we've touched on it many times now, but South Korean leaders before President Moon never attended this ceremony. Do you think now that President Moon has gone and is going to give a speech, should this become an annual event where every single South Korean president, regardless of their political affiliation, should go to?
Yeah, well, I mean, personally, I think that should be that way, but you can't tell in the future, right? What happens in the next president, what we do. But I think that's the very, I think good idea to doing it without the political affiliation. It's not about the politics; it's about the social issue, I think. And then there was, people died, and without knowing why they're dying. And there's excessive government power and abuse the civilians, right? Killed, must kill, right? So I think that's the things we have to pay attention. I think getting to the meeting annually by the president, I think that's a good sign for the reconciliation.
Yeah, let's hope so, and let's also hope that President Moon continues to go for the duration of his term. During my research into our chat today, I did read that Jeju Islanders weren't allowed to publicly talk about the April 3rd incident all the way until 1997. You said you saw a drama back in 1991 that didn't go into too much detail about what went on. It kind of scratched the surface. Can you explain why the people of Jeju weren't allowed to speak up until then, and what was it that changed in 1997?
You have to look at what happened in 1997, actually. The former president, Kim Dae-jung, was elected. So he was one publicly promised to conduct government investigation on the matter. So they was happy, and they knew that the government would do something for them for the first time after decades, right? So they were happy, and they were willing to talk about it. And then the former president, Kim Dae-jung, kept his promise, and he formed the Special Investigative Committee, and then they passed the Special Act.
I was speaking to a friend of mine, a Korean friend of mine, whose family is from Jeju, and even despite the fact that some of her relatives went missing, never to be seen again, or died, she didn't have that much of an understanding about the history. So it goes to show just how purged from the history books this awful event was. And well, that's where we're going to break into our conversation with Professor An, because we are going to pass over to the ceremony in Jeju. We'll be coming back to Professor An shortly, but in the meantime, let's listen in to President Moon Jae-in.
Residents of Jeju Island,
돌담 하나
On each stone wall and every fallen blossom of camellia flower, where the ages of grief is present here in Jeju Island, you all have asked, does spring exist on this land for the past 7 decades? Today, I would like to let you know of the spring of Jeju. Despite the lengthy tragedy, deep sorrows that have led to tears, spring will blossom here in Jeju, just like grape blossoms are in full bloom. You haven't forgotten the April 3rd incident, and there are those who were in pain with all of you. And thus we are able to gather like we are here today, overcoming the times of silence. The surviving victims, bereaved families, and residents of Jeju Island have exerted their full efforts to let the bitter grief, pain, and truth of the incident be known. And thus, I sincerely console all of you and extend my deepest appreciation. Citizens of Jeju and fellow Korean citizens, 70 years ago here in Jeju Island, innocent people lost their lives under the name of ideology. Although they didn't know what ideologies were, the innocent civilians who lived happily even without home gates, beggars, and thieves were slaughtered without knowing why. On November 17th of 1948, the martial law was proclaimed on Jeju Island, and centering around the mountainous areas in the center, the operation of making the island desolate unfolded. If a single person of the family was missing, all of them were killed just because they were labeled as the family of an invader. 95% of the villages were put on fire, and there were even villages where the entire people have been killed. From 1947 to 1954, an estimate of 1/10 of the Jeju's then population, or about 30,000 people, lost their lives. The boundary of life and death drew by the ideologies was not only present at the site of the massacre. People lost all of their family members all at once, but they continued to carry out their lives, staying silent in order not to be labeled as the family of rioters. The agonies were passed down continuously. The parents had to wither their children's aspirations of wanting to work for the nation by becoming soldiers and civil servants. While the April 3rd incident is a pain and sorrow that have been left in all parts of Jeju, Jeju became an island that must erase all memories in order to survive. And for a long time that cannot be expressed in words, the truth was not erased from the hearts of the Jeju residents. Tearful efforts to correct April 3rd incident within our history did not stop. On April 27, 1960, at the Gwandokjeong Plaza, students and youth of Jeju came together fighting against the unjust authorities that forced them to stay still and forget. 1,500 middle and high school students of Jeju condemned the March 15 illegal election and cried out for the truth of the incident. And that year, the spring of April did not last long before it was withered by the May 16 military power, yet the courage of letting the truth be known did not disappear. Numerous April 3rd incident organizations recall the memories of the incident. And remembering the incident was a taboo, and just talking about it was considered rebellious. Yet amid such oblivion, there were those who awakened us by engraving the pain of April 3rd incident into pieces of art. During the peak of Yushin dictatorship in 1978, novelist Hyung Ki-young published Suni's Uncle, and there was Kim Seok-bum's The Death of Kra, and Volcanic Island, poet Lee San-ha's epic poem of Hallasan Mountain, Painter Kang Yo-bae, who finished the April 3rd series of 50 works during 3 years, completed the withering of the camellia flower. And there was the first ever documentary movie featuring the April 3rd incident, director Jo Sang-bong's Red Hunt, 지슬 of director Oh Myul, Jeju Prayer of director Im Heung-sun, the sad song of Darang Shigur Cave of director Kim Dong-man, late director Kim Kyung-ryul's Endless Song Times, and singer An Chi-hwan's Sleepless Namdo Island. At times, the efforts of these artists that have led to their arrest and imprisonment have helped us be aware that the April 3rd incident is not just an unfortunate incident of the past, but rather a story of all of us who live the present. And finally, we became to realize that remembering the truth about the incident is the process of opening a new road to democracy, peace, and human rights. And together with the residents of Jeju Island, there were many who remember the pains of the April 3rd incident, and thanks to them, we have been awakened. And to all of the agony and efforts that arose from state violence, I extend my deepest apologies and appreciation once again as the President of the nation. Surviving victims, bereaved families of the April 3rd incident, fellow citizens, the victory of democracy has finally opened the road to the truth. In 2000, the Kim Dae-jung administration enacted the Special Act on unveiling the truth of April 3rd incident and launched the April 3rd Incident Committee. President Roh Moo-hyun, for the first time as nation's sitting president, acknowledged the nation's responsibility over the April 3rd incident and participated in the memorial service to apologize to the victims, the bereaved families, and the residents of Jeju. Today, based on such principle, I vow that I will continue to head towards a complete solving of the incident. There will be no stepping back or a cease in regaining the impaired reputation and revealing the truth of the April 3rd incident. And on top of this, I declare that the truth of April 3rd incident is something that cannot be denied by any forces, and that it has now been stationed as a clear historic fact. I will establish the truth of the violence pushed upon by the state authorities, stop the false accusation, and regain the impaired reputation. To do this, I will continue to complete the excavation of the remains. The government also, on its part, will exert its full efforts to heal the wounds and pains of the bereaved families and surviving victims. And on one hand, the government will closely cooperate with the National Assembly on areas that need legislative support, including compensation and an establishment of a National Trauma Recovery Center. A complete solving of the April 3rd incident is indeed a firm basis of reconciliation and unity, as well as peace and human rights longed for by the Jeju Islanders and all of our citizens. Citizens of Jeju, fellow Korean citizens, right now Jeju is overcoming all of the past agonies and reviving as a land of peace and life. Today, before the fallen spirits of the April 3rd incident, we once again affirm that peace and coexistence can only stand on truth instead of ideology. A fierce conflict of the left and right led to a tragic history, but the victims of the April 3rd incident and Jeju residents have moved beyond the distrust and hatred left behind by ideologies. Late Mr. Oh Chang-gi was wounded during the incident, but voluntarily served the Marine Corps when the Korean War broke out and participated in the Battle of Incheon. Late Mr. Kim Tae-seng, who lost his wife, parents, mother-in-law, and sister-in-law, decided to serve in the military voluntarily after writing a letter of patriotism in blood. The youth who were named communists during the incident protected their home and even risking their lives. Ideologies were only used as a justification for genocide. The residents of Jeju defeated the tragedy caused by ideologies with reconciliation and forgiveness. And in Jeju's Hagiri, a commemorative statue was established for the fallen heroes who died protecting the homeland and victims of the incident. The statue was established with the aim of forgiving, as all of them were victims. And in 2013, when the conflict peaked, the organization of the April 3rd bereaved families and the Jeju Veteran Police Association declared reconciliation with no conditions. Now the movement of reconciliation reached out by Jeju Islanders must be enjoyed by all of our citizens. Standing here today, I would like to appeal to the citizens of the nation. Still today, there are many who turn their backs against the truth of the incident. There are still those who look at the April 3rd incident with distorted perspectives of past ideologies. And still in Korea, there are narratives of hatred and hostility left behind by ideologies. Now we must be able to face the painful history. Facing the tragic history is not only between nations. We ourselves now must confront the April 3rd incident and move beyond the framework of outdated ideologies. Now the Republic of Korea must be a nation where a just conservative and just liberal compete with justice. And we must usher in an era where fair conservatives and fair liberals are evaluated based on fairness. Without justice and fairness, whether it be conservatives or liberals, the flag of victory cannot be won for our citizens. The dark shadow of hostility that was present in all corners of our lives must now be removed, and let us all make efforts to let dignity bloom. This is indeed what the hills of Jeju are telling us today. Surviving victims, bereaved families of the April 3rd incident, and fellow Korean citizens, unveiling the truth of the April 3rd incident is about regaining the universal value of human rights and reflecting back on our tragic history, moving beyond the boundaries of regions. Regaining the impaired reputation of the incident is our future of heading towards reconciliation and coexistence, as well as peace and human rights. Even amid deep wounds and scars, Jeju Island shouted for values of peace and human rights for the past 7 decades. And such values will lead to peace and coexistence on the Korean Peninsula and further continue as a message of peace for the humanity. The desire for April 3rd incident for eternal peace and human rights will never sleep. This is also a historic responsibility given to me as president. Today's commemorative ceremony should be a comfort for the fallen heroes and victims of the April 3rd incident, and I hope it can become a new starting point for us all.
Okay, there we have it. That was President Moon Jae-in delivering his first speech on the Jeju April 3rd incident, one of the darkest periods in Korea's history. Unfortunately, he did go rather over schedule, so we don't have time to ask another question of our guest, Professor An Jun-sung. Thank you ever so much for coming into the studio. We appreciate your insights today. Okay, that's where we're going to wrap it up for now. We'll be back again with our next newscast. It is coming up at noon Korea time, so until then, goodbye.